Welcome back to the show. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief of Real Clear Politics, talking now with Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon. Senator, I covered you, Senator, when you were in the House, and I remember being struck by you because you were a young man, but you were mostly concerned with old people.
Carl, I was thinking that it would really be a trip down memory lane if we were to go through all of the hearings and the like. But I'll give you an update. One of the things that's really pleased me so far is some young people in journalism got a hold of the galleys. And a couple of them said to me point blank, this book doesn't sound like it's written by a typical senator. And I just told them, you made my day.
Let's give the title of the book. It Takes Chutzpah: How to Fight Fearlessly for Progressive Change. It's released this week. The official date is January 14th. I'm talking to Senator Wyden the day before. I was thinking about chutzpah. It's a great word. We all know the old joke about the definition of chutzpah is the guy who murders his parents and then throws himself on the mercy of the court because he's an orphan. But you give actually a more serious and more constructive definition of chutzpah. Why don't you tell our listeners and our viewers?
I see it, Carl, as the indispensable instrument for making life better in America. And actually, if you look back through history, and I touch on this, some of our greatest deeds, the biggest accomplishments, Abe Lincoln, for example, Dr. Martin Luther King, that was all pure chutzpah because they were taking on the odds. And they had to be bold and they had to be patient to explain what was at issue. And, I'm very proud that I can kind of pick up on that message. My parents fled the Nazis in the 30s. Not all got out. The book is dedicated to my mom. You can see that on the front of the book because she's wearing her Army uniform. My dad was one of the famous Ritchie boys, the German kids who dropped the propaganda pamphlets on the Nazis, but I dedicated the book to my mom because it was those young Jewish women who kept telling their parents and their grandparents, you aren't taking Hitler serious enough, because a lot of them just kind of dismissed him. And because my mom and a small number of others convinced these men to get the hell out of Nazi Germany, I have a chance to be here and talk about somebody I've admired for years in journalism, Carl, because I always thought you and my dad would have liked each other.
Yeah, listen, I want to ask you, the subtitle is using chutzpah to, produce change, progressive change. But when I think about the rules of it, you have 12 rules of chutzpah. I'm going to read you the first and the last one. If you want to make change, you have to make noise. All right, that sounds like chutzpah. The 12th one is political capital doesn't earn interest, and it's not worth anything if you don't spend it. I guess I was listening to that and I thought, okay, but those are interesting rules for affecting progressive change, but also just for affecting change and making a difference in the world. I would think some conservatives, you've worked with Mike Lee in the past, they would think those rules apply to them, and independents like myself. So there's a universal application to this, isn't there?
What I tried to do, Carl, and your point is well taken, is to say, in this context, I'm talking about progress, moving ahead. I don't want to move backwards. For example, one of the first rules that we illustrate is mifepristone, which is the medicine that constitutes a non-surgical, alternative to an abortion. And we said, let's make the decision then on the basis of science, not politics. And here we are 20 years later having the same debate because government, and you and I have gone through a variety of policies and evolution of them. Government is not linear. You don't go from point A to point B and say, well, at point B, we're absolutely done. We're having some of the same debates on mifepristone today that we did when I was a young member of the House with a full head of hair and rugged good looks.
You reminded me of something. I'm quick station break. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief for RealClearPolitics. I'm talking with Ron Wyden, Senator from Oregon, about his book, It Takes Chutzpah. You mentioned that battle that you've been fighting all this time. I think I interviewed you, it would have been 20 years ago, when I was at National Journal, about using technology to better fight wildfires. And this is something you've talked about in committee. This is an interest of yours, but here we are. Los Angeles is, on fire as we're talking, and we don't have the most up-to-date, techniques for wildfire management. Why is it so hard to take the technology and the science that we've discovered and apply it? Does our politics get in the way?
Well, I think we've known that these are much more partisan times, and I'm always trying to find common ground where I can. That's what the book is about. We have a whole chapter on the 26 words that created the internet. Chris Cox and I writing section 230. I hope, and I've been concerned the last couple of days about the fires being so politicized from people on the far right. I hope insurance companies in Florida pay close attention to what some of the Republicans are trying to do in California, because that would set a big precedent. And I want people to know that I subscribe to the old-fashioned definition of what we're dealing with here. And that is that the hurricane in Florida, the tornado in the Midwest, the fires in my part of the world, they are natural disasters. Now, can we do things to help mitigate? Absolutely. And I've tried to do that in a bipartisan way with my prescribed burn bill, where for the forest, because the forest is different than the brush that they're dealing with in California, but there are some principles that are the same. The prescribed burn issue, which I have had some, luck getting support across the political spectrum. When I first introduced it, Joe Manchin was my first sponsor. And prescribed burns are technology and science driving the opportunity during cold weather or the off season to try to do these burns, clear out the dead and dying materials, so that when you have a lightning strike or the heat, and I personally believe there'll be a debate among some of the people following your program, I think climate change is driving a lot of this heat and dryness. Other people have a different, view, but I wrote the biggest investment in fighting climate change in American history in 2022, the clean energy tax credits. And I think we can't ignore climate change.
That I'm glad you brought that up, because conservatives like to say, "Oh, climate change, it's that's just Democrats talking." Democrats like to say, "Well, this," and they have a flat tire, they think it's climate change. But it's clear that I grew up in California. There were Santa Ana winds then. They weren't 80 miles an hour. There's something going on. And it just seems to me that Republicans and Democrats ought to be able to put aside some of these debates about the ultimate cause and say, all right, but we both agree we need to use human ingenuity to mitigate the disasters. This is what you're talking about.
And Carl, you're being logical, and heaven forbid that logic should break out all over the hill. But these are not your grandfather's fires. Yeah. They're bigger, they're hotter, they're more powerful. I remember, and I'm sure you interviewed him scores of times, Mark Hatfield, our wonderful late senator. I was just a kid congressman, and he'd invite us all to his office. And, he was so thoughtful and so well respected. And he would invite us, and we'd come over in July, and he would say, "Colleagues, we are here to talk about the fire season." And we would all go, if Mark Hatfield said everybody was going to jump, we'd all go, how high? But that was the fire season for like a week in July. And now the fire season in my part of the world is year round. And we're seeing the consequences in the West.
That's right. Let me ask you, you mentioned the Communications Decency Act. I think if memory serves was its actual title, Section 230. You and Christopher Cox co-authored it. Is it time for an update?
Well,
and now that we could talk for an hour about that. So
yeah,
relating to your book.
I always operate on the theory that nothing is really static and it's not permanent. I do believe that a lot of the key principles that Chris and I developed, and we were young House members, and we sat in the little area that, allowed members to come and just have some quiet lunches, and said, this is going to be the beginning of writing technology, policy. And I said, and Chris and I basically could finish each other's sentences for all these years. I said, what about personal responsibility? The person who posts the content should be liable for the content, not somebody who's just running the website or the blog or something like that. And so we hit it off on some of those principles. And I continued to believe, Carl, I'm a First Amendment hawk. The founding fathers had so many good ideas, but one of the best ones was the First Amendment. And a lot of, when I go back and do some reading on it, the founding fathers actually seemed to think that the First Amendment was more important than government. In other words, government was interesting and could be useful, but the most important thing was the First Amendment. And I look now at what Chris and I, put together, and I'm not sure a lot of voices that don't have money and power could even get out today. For example, the Me Too movement. When the Me Too movement took on all those powerful people at the studios and the networks and the like, I'm not sure they could have gotten their story out without the help on the platform we got.
Does it bother you ever? And from where I see it, the Democrats, not you, but some Democrats have embraced censorship. They're not as tough on the First Amendment as they used to be. And some of this has come with Donald Trump's entrance into politics. Some of it predates that, but silencing voices, under the guise of combating misinformation, disinformation. But I'm old school on this. I'm with Tony Kennedy and Louis Brandeis, and the antidote to bad speech is good speech. And but some in your party are not there anymore, and I wonder if that troubles you.
I think, Carl, censorship has broken out all across the political spectrum. And this is something that is really bedrock to my views, and talking about the history of the First Amendment and the like. This is something that makes our country so special. I've now had 1,101 open to all town hall meetings at home in Oregon. Everybody can come. 1,101.
Wow.
90 minutes. I don't give any speeches. If there's an issue in the news, I'll say 2 minutes worth, but we just take the questions. And I always tell people, remember, in much of the world, you can't even have an open to all town hall meeting. And in fact, if there's a town hall meeting, you better say what the government wants you to say, or they'll drag you off to some gulag or something. And yeah, free speech. And as you know, my dad was a journalist, and I make sure that whenever his name comes up, I reference his book about the Bay of Pigs, where there's a picture. It's called The Bay of Pigs, The Untold Story. There's a picture of my dad and Fidel Castro on the back of the book. And Castro says, Peter Wyden knows more about it than we do. And I'm sure you remember him over covering the House and the Senate. Henry Hyde, the legendary conservative from Illinois. Believe it or not, Henry Hyde and my dad became very close friends, personal friends, over the book about the Bay of Pigs. Henry loved the book. And he would call my dad up and say, Peter Wyden, he said, your kid's one of these Democrats, but I love him anyway. Let me ask you about the footnote on page 36. And I'm
talking to Ron Wyden, senator from Oregon, and the author of a new book himself. It Takes Chutzpah. Would it be cheeky of me to ask you if it takes chutzpah to recommend expanding the Supreme Court to 15 justices, which is what I think you do?
Well, yeah, it does. But what I want was some balance, number one. And as you know, Carl, what I was trying to do, and I think this will still come up, is stage it over a number of years so that presidents of both political parties, under anything resembling normal circumstances, would both have a chance at it. But I think the ethics issues are really serious here, and we need some reforms.
Let's end on this, because I've taken enough of your time, but I sure like talking to you again.
Oh, let's do it again. Let me get through the upcoming period with with the book and the nominations. And if it's not violating any ethics rules, I'll buy you a nosh, which is Yiddish for a small sweet.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Okay.
Last question then. Looking ahead the next 4 years, are there areas you can work with the Trump administration? I know some Democrats are just thinking, it's time to dig in and be the resistance. Other people saying, no, we need to find common ground. Where are you on this?
Well, Carl, I've got a rule on it, and that is work with anybody who wants to do the right thing and help us, get ahead. And, you take the immigration issue. There is an opportunity here to do something that the late Ted Kennedy and George W. Bush were talking about, which is to secure the border, because we clearly have problems, and have a path to citizenship. Now, is that on the table today? Of course not. But who tried to do that and it began to make some progress? Ronald Reagan. And I think, heaven forbid, that something that showed conservatives that you were serious about border security and that showed people across the political spectrum that there would be a pathway to citizenship for people who worked hard and played by the rules and the like, would be the kind of thing that would lend itself to, to presidential leadership. And I sure hope they will. I mean, what we have so far is Mike Crapo and I, Republican, now the chair of the Finance Committee, I'm the ranking Democrat. We work so hard to get the pharmacy benefit managers, the PBMs, these middlemen, reined in. And at the end of the year, we tried to have it include in the final kind of package. Mike and I got 26 votes. The vote was 26-0, and the House and the Senate picked up on it. But then Donald Trump and Musk said, nope, they barked and it was out. And Donald Trump had actually even talked for the week before about how good it was. So I just hope that what you're talking about, which I call principled bipartisanship, not just trying to get an ideological trophy, but principled bipartisanship, will have its day.
Well, that's going to do it for us today. You've been listening to Ron Wyden, Senator from Oregon. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief, Real Clear Politics, and I commend the book to you. It Takes Chutzpah, How to Fight for Progressive Change, and I tout it to progressives and independents and conservatives.
Made my day.
Yeah. So, and we'll join you again tomorrow, same time, 3 p.m. in the West, where Ron is from, and 6 p.m. here in the East.